I'd like to open the questioning by asking you to clarify a distinction that you make between individuality and personality. I understand that personality or within the theory of positive disintegration is an achievement, whereas individuality is a given. I wonder if you could make that distinction more explicit and tell us something about both the nature of individuality and the achievement of personality.
Yes, I think that you underlined very clearly the difference between individuality and personality. I think that individuality could be expressed in many ways of creativity, of good work, of something like temperamental activity and so on, but individuality means never, in my opinion, something like levels of development. I do not see in individuality any clear potential for development toward the highest level. You can have, for instance, very great individuals in theater, like, how I can say, player, yes?
Drama.
Or you can have very good individuality in army. You can have in many fields. But, well, this is not associated, this is not connected with higher and higher conscious development. When you have to do with conscious development, with hierarchy of levels, with hierarchy of aims, you have always to do with personality. In development of even personality as something like achievement. I'm not sure I'm clear here.
Does that mean that individuality is sort of the consistency in what a person does, which he does not evaluate as either good or bad, but in personality development, the primary concern is with sort of aspects of that individual's behavior and relationships with others that he evaluates as important to him, good, bad, and so forth?
Not only for him, but also for others.
Okay.
Does personality always develop out of individuality? In other words, do we always find the person beginning, or the basic constitution of an individual being different from others and then developing into a personality? Is that inevitable?
Yes, in some extent, yes, but I think that, well, individuality, well, presents something like a part of characteristic for developing personality, but I think never as a global basis for development of personality. You can have individuals who never will reach personality level.
I guess that brings us to the question of just what determines whether a person will in fact be able to achieve or work towards a personality, and what factors in fact are involved there?
Well, I think that's the most important factor is a different kind of potential, developmental potential. In relation to individuality, you can have, for instance, a very important interests in some ways, but you will have not such a characteristic like emotional, imaginative, and intellectual overexcitability together as a potential for development. You will not necessarily have in individuality, in potential for development of individuality, such a factors like, well, nuclei of inner psychic media. You will very rarely find such a factors like nuclei for self-conscious identification with yourself, with your history of development and so on. I can say that one of very clear differences is that individuality is developing without clear inner consciousness, with autonomy and authenticity and personality always.
It sounds that it may be that the difference between personality and individuality is, in fact, in the absence of those differentiating characteristics you just described. It's almost as if the attainment of personality was the attainment of self-directing centers, the third factor, and so on.
Yes.
But your suggestion is that it's primarily when those dynamisms emerge that development is a possibility. Is that right?
Yes. I can say briefly one more characteristic, that personality present always some traits of individuality. Individuality can present in some cases, but this is not common to have some clear traits of personality to develop individuality to develop personality.
When you talk about developmental potential, or the potential to develop personality, you're referring to something that is biologically given, or that is transmitted. Are you talking about it in that sense of the word?
Yes, but I prefer to use the term psychobiologically, not strictly biologically.
What would be the distinction here?
Well, because I think that in our biological history of development, we have always nuclei for psychological development. I'm not sure I'm clear here.
Well, I'm wondering, for example, is the potential to develop personality different, say, at certain different evolutionary periods? Would you say that there is evolution of that potential to develop?
Surely. This means, well, not all traits of your potential, even if this potential will be very strong, will appear very early. You can have some traits of developmental potential at the period of puberty and after.
As I understand it, the developmental impetus is, in your description, an instinctive one. Does this mean that the dynamisms that you describe, such as the third factor, self-directing dynamism and so forth, are also instinctive? Or are they properties or dynamisms which emerge only as a function of learning or the person's individual experience?
You know, on the early stages of development, you can differentiate instinctive forces and intellectual and emotional and so on. But I think that's on the higher level of development, they collaborate and you cannot clearly distinct. For this reason, I think this is, how we can say, combination of instinctive, intellectual and emotional forces.
Okay. So the reason that an individual may not have developed personality, as we talked about it a couple of minutes ago, is unlikely to be simply that he is lacking the hereditary components of that, the hereditary components that some other people may have. It's not simply a matter of inheriting or not inheriting the predisposition toward
surely not, but after all, I have this opinion that potential for development means one of the most important factors for development.
Okay, and as I understand you now, that potential is an interaction between biological givens and the person's experience as he develops.
Surely.
Okay.
Are there then crucial experiences that bring out the developmental potential? In other words, the expression of that potential is dependent on certain crucial experiences.
Yes, this means if you have a very, very strong developmental potential, your social experience, for instance, will add many things toward quicker and quicker development of developmental potential. Surely.
Would it even, would these experiences, say in childhood, be so important that you could already distinguish children with a considerable developmental potential compared
Yes,
to children
yes.
that do not have it?
Not always, but very often. For instance, in one of my book, I presented a girl of about 2.5 years who presented very clear potential for development of rhythmic dance and so on and so on. And when mother asked her one day, well, why you dance always? You can be very tired. She said, well, mommy, I do not dance myself. They are my legs which moves in this toward dance.
Right.
And I think that here even you see very early nuclei of object-subject in oneself. Something like division between object and subject in oneself. This relation toward the legs of this girl. Besides of very clear developmental potential toward rhythmic and dance. As you know, you can have very clear and early developmental potential in direction to music.
When you talk about the subject-object, as you just did, you mean the person is capable of making an object of himself?
Yes.
He is able
Yes.
to put distance, or in this case the
Yes.
child, the girl, is able to put distance between
Yes.
herself and...
Yes. Surely
herself.
this is very superficial, very, how I can say, nuclear. Not clear, but after all, this is sufficiently clear to see such a mechanism, such a dynamism.
And one of the reasons that interests me is that there's a very popular conception that one of the problems with people in contemporary culture is that they are sort of disembodied in some sense. And what you just described with a young girl was, it seemed to me, an instance in which the girl had put distance between herself and her bodily actions.
Yes.
But for you, that is a sign of growth potential.
Surely.
And within some
Sure.
other conceptions, I believe that would be considered a problem in itself,
Yes.
if this person is distant, as you described it.
Yes, and you see this phenomenon mostly in neurotics and psychoneurotics. For instance, in neurosis, with in the field of vegetative nervous system, you see very often such an attitude towards something which is strange in oneself, which is not in integration with personality. And in psychoneurotic, the same. They see that this is something strange for them, that this is something which creates something different than their personality. For instance, in relation to obsessions, in relation to anxiety, in relation to overexcitability. Does this go out from a normal life of psychoneurotics? Something appears from time to time which is strange, which is different, and not the same with normal everyday life. And I think for this reason that in psychoneurotics you observe much more often such a phenomena like subject-object in oneself. And the same you observe in very ill people who present something like fairly high level of general culture, of self-consciousness. The sickness help in some extent to observe themselves like something different from normal life, something like exteriorized.
So their pathology, if it really is a pathology, which I understand that your question, is in part that they pay attention to what is strange, and part of what forms the potential for change or personality development then is paying attention to that about yourself which you find strange, or that which is strange.
And this increases possibility of self-observation and self-consciousness. They observe something else in themselves. They are not integrated. They feel not that they are integrated. They feel they are sometimes disintegrated. That some functions are out from them.
Are you referring here to inner conflicts of, using that term fairly generally, are you referring here to inner conflicts as that which is strange and that which the person who has the potential for growth is paying a special attention to?
Yes, partially, but here is coming another factor. For instance, if you have your inner conflicts, you developed in the same time after some experience, that's you perceive something like something lower into yourself and higher, because you have inner conflicts between something and something other, between something different. And if you have potential for development of the so-called hierarchical approach, you elaborate little by little such a judgment and such a feeling that that something exists in yourself like higher and lower, more you and less you.
Yeah, but it seems to me so often that the type of conflict that we experience is conflict with the environment, with the world around us, rather than with ourselves.
External conflict, surely.
You would distinguish that from...
Very clearly, and I think that external conflicts means nothing concerning true or accelerated development. External conflict means something rather primitive, and even one more thing. If you develop your hierarchical internal conflicts, your external conflicts tend to diminish.
So as your internal conflicts increase, your external conflicts with...
No, diminished your external conflicts.
I see.
Yes. But if you have conscious, elaborated, hierarchical internal conflicts, they influence toward diminution of your external conflicts.
And yet you would suggest that external conflicts are necessary in order to get the process of internal conflicts going.
Surely, but in the processes of development, external conflicts are little by little subordinated to internal conflicts and to the processes of development in general.
If we go back to childhood for a minute, could you distinguish, say, in a child, we've been talking about behavior being abnormal, or could you distinguish different types of abnormalities? For example, is negativity in a young child different from a child that, say, portrays the ability to dance, as you gave that example? What determines the direction in which the, quote, abnormality goes? Is there something...
Well, as you know, I think I dislike very much the notion of normality. This is something which should, not in few years, but in some time, go out in this form, like we accept. But after all, I can say that I differentiate healthy abnormality, excuse me please for such a combination, and unhealthy abnormality. This means they are abnormality which is very, very positive for development. You know that French school, in relation to this discussion, many discussion about norm, French school created the term of, how I can say, dégénéré supérieur. This means people with degeneration, but superior degeneration, because they could not link their opinion with norm. This was something very abnormal, even perhaps pathological, but presenting in the same time genius or very high creativity. For this reason, what to say about this? Say, well, superior degeneration.
So normal development would be very different from what, say, societal standards of normal development would be in children.
I think so. And I excuse me please for such a statement. In my opinion, that's, well, a normality in relation to intellect, I think. Normality means, well, if you use this terrible term, intellectual quotient, this will be something like 85 or 90. This means this will be, normality will be low level, very low level of intelligence.
You have a developmental quotient then, a quotient of how
Yes,
far you've developed.
Yes, well. The most frequent level of intelligence means about between 85 and 90.
One of the things this suggests to me is that what you're saying is consistent with research on some creative individuals done by Barron and others, in which they find that some artists, especially the more creative artists, are will show some of the same symptoms that are considered to be deviant and suggestive of pathology. Show some of the same symptoms as occasionally schizophrenics or severely psychoneurotic individuals, but the difference is in that they have a different attitude toward their behavior, toward the conflicts that they have,
Surely.
toward some of the behaviors that are called
Thank you
symptomatic.
very much for such opinion, and by answer to this opinion, I will try to answer to your question, because I did not answer this. Well, I think that this is after longitudinal observation, and even not longitudinal, but multidimensional observation, we can differentiate between abnormality, which presents possibility for positive development, for creativity, and abnormality, which presents something negative, something like well, descending toward a lower level. And we have many such traits. For instance, fairly high level of self-consciousness. For instance, a bit always of sociability. For instance, creativity. For instance, empathy, not artificial empathy, but authentic empathy, and many such traits, which you can find in people. They are, in large sense of this term, abnormal, but in the same time they developed positively.
So this is largely the basis for differentiating between positive and negative disintegration,
Sure.
right?
And after longitudinal studies, you see clearly such a difference.
In this respect, you've criticized Terman's longitudinal study. I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Longitudinal study, what means this?
On Terman's work in California, on the longitudinal work. I think somewhere in one of your works, you criticized that study as not having, or Terman not having done what you just called a dimensional analysis.
Yes.
I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I am not sure I understand clearly your question.
Well, the study that I was referring to is by Terman, where he studied individuals over time.
Yes.
And I believe somewhere you claimed that the failure of that study is because the diagnosis, if you like, or the assessment wasn't multidimensional, according to...
Yes, and not multi-level in the same time.
Yes, I wonder if you could go into that a little more.
This means, well, if you study longitudinal cases from the point of view, for instance, of developmental possibility or a developmental possibility, you should introduce here such a factors as personality, levels, multi-levelness, multidimensionality, because if you will not introduce to your study such a factors, you will, I think, you will be, well, you will go in the very erroneous way. You will not differentiate the most important factors.
Okay, I think that it's necessary to make a distinction between multidimensional and multilevelness. When many psychologists use the term multidimensional, they are just referring to the fact that in their research they're assessing a wide variety of variables rather than, say, one or two. And that, as I understand you, is not at all what you're referring to when you talk about multilevelness.
Yes, this means we can accept that the multi-levelness is one of most dominant factor in multidimensional approach, but not vice versa.
Okay. Could you describe in some more detail then what multilevelness means in addition? What are the levels that make this a plural concept,
Well, I dislike in such opinion to criticize some psychological schools, but this is in some extent necessary. Well, I think that we are going too far from our common people opinion. In common people opinion, with mediocre level of intelligence and emotional potential and so on, this is very clear. Multi-levelness is very clear. I tried to to introduce such a experiment, such a examination of many people, and I see that with mediocre culture, almost all people will differentiate between, for instance, will clearly tell you that torture is something bad. That sentence without examination in relation to somebody who committed something who is suspect is something very bad. That's beating a child is something bad. From the psychological point of view, this is not clear. This means, psychologists will say, well, this is subjective. Even Bertrand Russell in his philosophy told that, from the point of view of intellectual analysis of everyday life, the torture, we can nothing say bad about torture. And I am asking, where we are? Well, all common people will accept that there are differences in the level of development, but even Hewlett Jackson, neurologist, will tell us that he see clearly the difference in level of activity of nervous system, but psychologists generally do not accept this. Why? May I?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I think I accept that as for our intellectual work, we have something basical methods. This means perception and logical analysis. We have the same in the field of emotional and moral experience. This means we have basical feelings, like I told you about torture, about the sentence, about many things like this. And I think that for people they are normal from the point of view of moral attitudes, from the point of view of emotional and instinctive functions. They have such axiomata. This means this is bad and this is good, this is positive, this is negative. With I can say even that emotional functions are instruments of value judgment, of evaluation. Like perceptions and logical analysis is in the service of intellect, generally speaking.
Does this mean then that there is some predictable pattern of moral development, as someone like Kohlberg has suggested in his description of moral development? There are several stages through which individuals go. And the higher stages, according to his description, there are more abstract principles by which the person makes moral judgments which affect others as well as himself. Is your description comparable?
No, this is different. This is clearly different. Well, I think that the valuation, hierarchy of values, is based basically on evaluation of level of emotional and instinctive functions, and that emotional and instinctive functions take part, dominant part in such a differentiation.
So you're saying that the emotional and instinctive functions, the developmental potential of a person, and presumably of a culture as well, although, is independent of cultural factors that are specific to the culture, independent of education of that enjoyed in that culture, independent of social class, say?
I cannot say that they are completely independent, but after all, I do not accept anthropological attitude and transcultural attitude. That's our activity depends, and our judgment that something is bad and something is good, something is valuable, something unvaluable, is coming from the opinion of society, of milieu, and so on. I discussed one time with Professor Benedict, you know. I asked her, how you explain that some people in given society is completely against all opinion of the society, and work against all opinions? How you can explain, for instance, the attitude of Christ, or the attitude of Socrates, or the attitude of many others? If the source of their opinion is society, why they are completely contrary to such opinions?
So your suggestion is somewhat comparable to that proposed by Maslow when he talks about empirically derivable value systems. He talks about how I think his favorite comparison was with the early experiments in which small children, if given a chance, selected a diet which was appropriate and well balanced. And his suggestion was that the same kind of thing may occur, if not interfered with, in other aspects of human development as well. Is your concept comparable to that?
In some extent. You know that, perhaps you know that, Maslow was my friend, and very good friend. And we agree in many points, but not in all. And I can say that, less you have global developmental potential, less you present of positive maladjustment, more you are influenced by society and by social milieu, and more you present suggestibility towards such opinions. More you have, more strong you have a developmental potential, more you have your own individuality, more you are conscious, you are surely adjusted toward some opinion, some conditions, and so on, but very consciously, and you are maladjusted toward many other suggestions and opinions and influences. And I think this is problem. This is one of the most dominant factors in positive development. To understand social media, to be in agreement in many conditions, but from another side, to be independent, and to be in the condition of positive maladjustment. This is, I can say, conditio sine qua non, perhaps correct me please, of higher and development. And
yeah, the notion of development, and you mentioned positive development, immediately brings to mind, of course, negative development or disintegration in some sense. We are now talking about levels, I presume, when we talk about either positive development or disintegration. These levels are qualitatively different in nature, which would imply, and this is the point I'd like you to comment on, which would imply that the person is able, in some sense, to change, psychologically perceive differently the world he lives on at a higher level than he would be at a lower level. Do you actually mean to imply that there is some distortion of his perception of reality, or that it is generally qualitatively a different type of reality?
And different, and even much more multi-dimensional, and much more, I told you, multi-level. And I think that such a people see much more clearly reality than so-called normal people. They present emotional, imaginative, intellectual, psychomotor overexcitability. What means overexcitability? That they react, they see much more dimension, much more richness, much more creativity in the reality than in comparison with others. And for this reason, they see this reality in many dimensions, and they, in the same time, they present emotional, intellectual attitude toward this reality. And because this is multi-dimensional and multi-level attitude, they present also tendency to change this reality, because they see multi-levelness of this reality. They see higher level of reality and lower level of reality, and they present this tendency to change the reality toward creation, elaboration of higher levels.
Well, I wonder if you could give an example, say take the instinctive function or drive, whatever other theorists call it, of aggression. Now, does the expression of aggressiveness in people, for example, change as they develop? And how does it change as they develop, for example? I wonder if you could be more explicit.
Well, like aggressiveness, also in relation to any other functions, people present something like increasing criticism toward themselves. If they have developmental potential fairly strong, they have, as I told you, nuclei of inner psychic media, nuclei of self-consciousness, and of overexcitability. If they present such traits, they surely see the possibility to compare many levels of one or another functions. I am not sure I am clear. With overexcitability, with multi-levelness in approach, they see possibility to differentiate the levels of concrete functions. for instance, aggressivity, for instance, symptomy, for instance, well, anxiety. And they begin to see clearly and differentiate levels. For instance, aggressivity or anxiety or even smile stop to be only something like, correct me, Unitarian notions. But something is changing in relation to such a function. This means for the as the most dominant, this is levels of these functions. For instance, much more important is different of level between higher level of aggressivity and lower level, between smile, subtle, delicate smile and noisy laughing, than to see as something global, all laughing, all smiling, all aggressivity and so on. And here is very clear different approach. Multi-levelness here in relation to such functions play much more great role, larger role, and is understood much more deeper and accepted much more deeper than, well, such a notion like aggressiveness.
This indicates that the concept of sublimation as used in the psychoanalytic tradition is not at all applicable to what you're describing.
No.
Since the differentiation of levels, as you're talking about it, is not represented in psychoanalytic description. In psychoanalytic description, it seems that the energies are almost directly transferred from sort of one zone to another without any increase in subtlety or sensitivity.
They begin little by little in psychoanalytical school to introduce something like multi-levelness, but this is so crude, and so I think fairly superficial. That's, well, even we cannot, this is difficult to discuss what they want, because, for instance, they differentiate now levels of defensive forces. Defensive forces in the service of pathological drives, defensive forces in the service of ego, but never in the service of development. And we have surely defensive forces in the service of development.
Could you give an example of a defensive force working in the service of development? How might that occur?
Yes, very often. For instance, well, you see, for instance, that you have something like anxiety, and you analyze what means such anxiety. Is that coming from external conditions, from something like external experience, and perhaps this anxiety is coming from existential experience. And, well, you begin to meditate and to think about higher level of anxiety functions. And through thinking, through meditation, through comparison between anxiety in the service of lower level functions and higher level functions, you begin to subordinate your anxiety to as defensive forces in the service of development. You want to transform your primitive anxiety to much more complicated, much more existential, much more altruistic.
Are you suggesting that what some therapists might have called intellectualization is, in your judgment, an effective defense through which they differentiate and develop these emotional?
Surely, but this is not intellectualization, but this is rather control through emotional functions. You know that's, well, I accept very clearly that mostly of our acts of control, besides of such a field like mathematics, technique and so on, are controlled by emotional factors, by empathy, by love and so on.
I have another question that I wasn't quite clear on. When you talk, obviously, when you talk about development, you do not mean change with age or ontogenetic change. The type of development doesn't have any time period, or there is no set time period, or there's no clock for that.
Yes, even through such a term like transcendence of biological life cycle, or transcendence of your own psychological type, this is way to understand your question and to give your answer. No.
So it could occur, the development could occur, say, very late in life, or it might occur quite early.
Surely. And we know many cases like this.
Are there any particular stages in life when it is especially likely to occur, even though it could occur at any time? There may be particular stages in life when it is most likely to occur. Is that right?
Oh, yes, I think that's period of puberty and period of adolescence is the most perhaps creative. But well, this is only most creative because in all your ages you can develop your potential for development.
Jung also talks about the age of 35 to 40 as being an important one, suggesting that the process of individuation may begin in an important way at that age. Do you agree with his impression of that?
Yes, in some extent, but this depends from the strengths of potential for development and from psychological type and so on and so on.
Professor Dabrowski, if you don't mind, there are probably some questions from a number of other people here.
I am not sure if this question of levels of development is clarified. No?
It's not quite clear, I don't think, at least to me, but I wonder if we could get back to it in the next session.
Good.
Maybe we won't have to wait until the next session. I take it there are no pressing questions right now?
No, for me.
Well, let's pursue the one of development. One of the things that isn't quite clear, you've expressed two extremes. For example, in your example of smiling, you move from a quiet smile, for example, to loud laughter, which is determined by group activity in effect. I wonder if you could be more specific before you define how you distinguish at various levels. Specifically, what are the intermediate stages? For example, that was my original question with respect to aggression or whatever human quality or experience. Could you mention, be more explicit with respect to the intermediate stages between the two extremes?
In relation to aggressivity?
Say in relation to aggression, yeah. I mean, at the lowest level, for example, what would it be, and what would it be at, say, the first or whatever, the next level or at the next level? Could you give an example?
Me, I can give you here examples, but perhaps this will be even much more clear if I come to the sexual instinct. This will be even more clear than in relation to aggressivity. Okay. You have, for instance, the lowest level where you have, how I can say, you won't evacuate your sexual energy. And, well, you search for a partner, and, well, you do any choice, any psychological relations, only you see the partner as somebody who can help you in evacuation of your sexual energy. Now, this is the most primitive. And next, even in some psychopaths, you see that they became aggressive toward their partners after sexual act, sexual evacuation. And even you have in history something like killing of the partner, because, well, one kind of energy is evacuated and another on the level of such a primitive, in such a primitive type, is aggressivity. And this second function, how we can say, take place of the first. This is evacuated, and psychopath criminal is ready to do something. And what to do? Most easy to kill. This is terribly primitive level, and the higher level. Well, this is something like a phenomenon of psychologization. You see candidates for your partner, and you do something like superficial choice. You present much more subtlety. You present something like delicacy. Can I say this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and something like, I repeat, choice. This is not any deep choice. This is not any deep analysis of the object, but after all something. And well, something like feeling of sympathy after sexual act toward your partner. This is a bit higher level, bit clearly higher level, but mediocre level. And next you see many other levels. For instance, choice of partner. Very clear choice of partner. Next, tendency to preservation of partner. Tendency toward common understanding. Clear responsibility for the partner and his family, and so on. And next, you can see even very concrete, idealistic love, like in Kierkegaard or in Shakespeare drama, Romeo and Juliet, and so on and so on. You can see many levels. Well, not you can reject such example like Romeo and Juliet, because this is, after all, this is drama. Well, but after all, you see in everyday life such different levels in relation to aggressivity. Now you can have very strong, very unconscious, very brutal aggressivity, and you can have, for instance, Socratic irony, or something like jokes, or something like this, on different level, as something like one of the forms of aggressivity. And next, you can have such aggressivity like in President Lincoln, whose custom was such that he liked to present all arguments of his enemies in his special way, and he was very good in presentation of such arguments, and he presented the arguments of his enemies better than they could do. And after this very good explanation, he began to argue.
Mm-hmm.
But after all, well, this is something you can here observe something like aggressivity, because after all he was searching for his arguments and for his reasons. But this was so subtle, so high, that even this is difficult to say that this was the same kind of how I can say of notion of term aggressivity. This have had almost nothing to do. And for this reason I come back to the problem of multi-levelness. This multi-levelness means much more than the notion and the term of something like aggressivity, love, sexual instinct, and so on. Without a multi-level approach, we do not understand all such things, all such notions.
It seems to me in what you just described is that there is a tendency with development for something which is at first external or behavioral, say in the case of aggression, to become internal and expressed within the individual himself. Now, from that perspective, is it possible, in relation to the concept of sublimation earlier brought up, to talk about regression? Is it possible to regress from, say, a higher level to a lower level?
Well, this is very possible, but for instance, on the level of borderline of psychopathy and normality, this is very possible. On the second level, this means unilevel disintegration. This is even possible in some cases, in relation to cases from the borderline between second and third level, but further, no, impossible. If you are on the second part, on the third level of development, or borderline of third and fourth, or fourth level or secondary integration, this is impossible to come back in any conditions.
That suggests then that the concept of a regression in the service of the ego doesn't play a role for the transition between some of the levels. Is that correct?
Yes.
I also understand, though, that a comparable concept, that disintegration, or sort of return to a more primitive level of organization, is an important part of your description of positive disintegration and reintegration. Could you clarify for me when that kind of disintegration is important, and when a person may develop to the next stage, next level of development without disintegration? Why is it necessary in some cases to, in effect, regress or disintegrate, and not in all?
Yes, I understand very clearly. Well, you know, I do not reject a possibility of very high development out of any dynamism of disintegration. But in my study, I never observed such cases. This is, I passed through about 200 biographies of very eminent personalities. And well, in about 97%, they presented psychoneurosis, nervousness or overexcitability, and even borderline of psychosis. In some cases, I could not observe nothing like such abnormality. But for instance, I repeated this very often. Somebody told me that Mozart was such an individual with complete harmony. And I decided to study more and more Mozart. Well, and I found letters to his father, where he told him, as you know, he was very introvert and very inhibited. And he told him, well, father, you cannot even imagine how terrible and how he told, well, agonizing fears I have in relation to problem of death.
Of death?
Death, yes. And well, this Mozart, very, very harmonious and very, very well, very integrated, and well, and this was a reality. This means I cannot say, I repeat, I cannot say that they could or could not be some cases of development without positive disintegration. But I never observed such cases.
One of the things this may suggest is that what people have referred to as regression in many instances is what you would describe as sort of the emergence of the subject and object dynamism. In other words, regression may have been used simply as a word to refer to the process of turning inward and evaluating yourself, or beginning to evaluate yourself.
Yes, but well, this is another meaning of regression, so-called positive regression in the theory of positive disintegration. This means if you are very, very creative, very overexcitable, this means very nervous, if you have very easy frustrations, you present tendency to come back to your early experience, good experience, a pleasant experience. You present tendency to go to your mother, to your family life, and so on. You tend to escape to how I can say to something like imaginative life, poetic life, and so on. All this means, in my opinion, something like regression, because you are going out from your life. You feel that you are not prepared for such a level of life. And after something like I can say relaxation, after some saturation with pleasant experience, you can come back to your life and to, well, to work further, but after this kind of positive regression.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.